Hey there, good morning, and thanks for dropping by. Boy, hopefully next year we're doing this in the real all together, right? So today I'm going to demonstrate the resistance bands progressions from the Neuro Cross Training Volume 1 program. Most of you, I hope, have got this book. And I'm going to talk about the cueing and also demonstrate some of the progressions beyond Volume 1 that'll take into Volume 2 and 3. So the idea of neuro cross training is to combine physical training with optimal neural stimulation. I've identified 3 principles. In fact, I have a 4th that I'm going to be presenting tomorrow as well. And those principles are simply this. The first principle is train a lot of movement patterns. Okay, so we're going to train bilaterally, we're going to train unilaterally, reciprocally, we're going to train different ipsilateral patterns, contralateral patterns, the like. Sometimes we're going to be isolating a lower body element and training an upper body element in balance, single leg movements, for example, things like that. The idea of a lot of patterns, a lot of movement patterns is more neural stimulation, right? More coordination required. So that's the first principle. The second principle, training on your feet. Now, first of all, training on your feet, the majority of your neural receptors, proprioception, they are on the soles of your feet. So anytime you're training on your feet, you are already going to have, by virtue of that fact, more neural engagement, right, from a sensory point of view. Secondly, when you're training on your feet, this opens up all these movement pattern vocabularies for you, right? I know a lot of people have a lot of classic exercises they love to do on the floor. I get that, and some of them are very, very high value neurally as well. I say this as a principle simply to say, if you're going to optimize and progress your neural load with physical exercise, then you need to be training in a way that allows you to progress patterns and take your client to more and interesting patterns and combinations, ultimately ending up with choreography and reaction moves, etc., etc. And that is generally and intrinsically going to be more available to you if you're training standing on your feet. The third principle is to train with the appropriate dosages of metabolic stimulation, if you will, metabolic work. So every metabolic work rate, right, has distinct systemic benefits, physically, but also neurally. So heavy work, heavy slow work, for example, elevates BDNF. A lot of cardio work is obviously stimulating more oxygen into the brain. They're all related, as you'll see tomorrow's presentation on the theory itself. They're all related, and there's a tremendous amount of science dots, if you will, to connect in a lot of different aspects of physicality and exercise and neural health. So when you connect them all together, you really see the picture starts to emerge that, well, actually a variety of metabolic rates is going to be optimal, right? So metabolic dosages. And the fourth principle, and I guess a very obvious one, is to train with sensory intentions, if you will. So to understand that whether you're working visually or with auditory stimulation, tactile stimulation, proprioception, all those things factor into the central nervous system and how we react to exercise and how we react to our environment. All that to say, to be aware of the various aspects of sensory inputs when we're training. If we're going to be looking for optimal neural health from physical training, sensory adaptation and sensory stimulation is going to it's going to be part of that soup. This is a very big picture approach to training. It takes us away from isolated training. It takes us away from training body parts, leg day, chest day, back day, that sort of thing, and simply trying to elevate strength, and starts to look at training, physical training, more organismically. We're going to talk a little more about that word later on as well. Anyway, today, because bands and suspension are the thing that I know best in terms of training modality, this is how I demonstrate the ideas. But obviously, these principles can be applied to any resistance training tool, right? Okay, so enough of that, but there's a bit of the overview, and if you want to go deeper on that, tomorrow it should be pretty interesting. I've been grinding on this presentation for a while. I'll be providing a lot of dots for everybody else to connect to see what they think of this notion, right? Okay, so when we get into the band training, I think we'll start first with is the pressing progressions, okay? So, one of the things I think, one of the things I believe about training is that form isn't the be-all, end-all, right? Form evolves as people become more competent in different movements. So we can cue people to move the resistance, but not to become too obsessed with the form, because practice is going to progress, movements are going to progress, and form is going to clean up as people master different movement patterns, right? When somebody's starting from a very, either, maybe they've got some movement issues already or some strength issues, they're into rehab, obviously, you've got to meet people where they are. So the progressions that we start with at the very beginning are simply standing progressions to get people connected from the ground to their hands through their core and legs. And the simple one I like to start with is simply, feet shoulder width apart, always starting with a bit of resistance for the presses, and then simply pressing away and feeling that. What you want is starting with resistance and resisting the return, feeling the resistance through the range of motion. When people can start to feel that resistance through the entire range from the beginning to the end and back, right, they start to connect through their core, through their legs, through their feet, right? Also very useful to add breathing cues to the work as well. Now notice this, if I'm standing here, back to the anchor, working presses, I can work as well this overhand press when I've got this midpoint anchor. If I've got a different anchor height to work with, I can work those ranges of motion. The work's going to be a little different. It's all good, frankly. So here we are basically with our press. So the next notion is the lunge stance. Again, I like to be with the center of gravity basically over the quad, right? Leaning forward, leaning into it a little bit. Really, the power's coming off the back foot, right? So it's the ball of my foot into the ground, and just a little bit of a forward lean, and eyes on the horizon, and there's your staggered stance press. Now, other static stance presses that aren't in volume 1 are ideas like this. So I'm on a side lunge, and I'm pressing. Now, when you change the stance, you're changing the ground forces. You're also changing how the forces are working through the core and even in the upper body slightly. It is useful variety. Rather than doing 3 sets, for example, from a single leg lunge stance forward, doing 1 set from that, and then maybe another set from a slightly different lunge angle, and then another set from a slightly different lunge angle. If you're all in static stance, that's going to help progress the work globally, right? So I also want to say at this point, if you haven't taken the anchor point training course, one of the concepts we work with all the time is working around the clock, right? So you see all the progressions that you see in volume 1, a lot of those you can right away say, oh, I can take that same move and move it to different dimensions around the clock, and I'm going to get different lunge patterns going. What's interesting about that as we start to work is you can take that idea and then be giving cues to people to lunge to certain points on the clock as they progress to the point where you now want to train, maybe do some reaction type training with them where they've got to think and move rather than simply doing repetitions of the same movement all the time. Another simple approach to that would be to lay out some choreography and lay out a pattern. Okay, we're going to go 1, 11, 2, 2, 10, like that, working around the clock, right, in a choreography, and again, working all those different patterns in a specific way rather than simply repeating the same direction, again, is more challenging from a neural point of view, and obviously going to be better work in the overall, more complete work, more organismic work, right? I love that word, by the way. It's people laugh, but really that's the point, right? Is we're really trying to train not just our physical body, we're trying to train our entire organism, right? So there you go. Okay, so back to pressing. Here we are, the static stance, the static lunge, right? Again, I like to ask you if you want to tell people to get a little lower, that's interesting. If they want to get a little wider, again, you can see each of those static stances is going to change the work. So, once we get past the idea of the static stance on the pressing, then the next notions are still bilateral pressing, but with alternate front lunges. So the thing about the bilateral press with the alternate front lunge, that's a great high work rate exercise. If you're going for something where you're trying to get really amplify the amount of work you're doing, any of the bilateral work with the lunges in these different dimensions, that takes you there. So again, as I mentioned with the lunges before, so the pattern, right, straight ahead, and then lunging out, to 10 and 2, to 3, to 9, that type of thing. You can see with all those bilateral presses and just changing the angle of the lunge, different ground forces, different work through the core, more organismic, more complete rather than working the same range of motion. More neural challenge as well. So the idea next in pressing for patterns, right, would be an ipsilateral pattern. So here we're simply pressing off the same. Now you can see how when I'm working that ipsilateral pattern here, I'm actually, in terms of what's firing, it's a contralateral. I call it ipsilateral because I'm moving ahead with the same foot and the same hand. But in fact, if you'll notice here, it is my back left foot that is driving to the resistance of my front right, my right hand, right? That is the sling, right? That is firing that natural movement sling, right? Diagonally across my body. So in fact, that is the more interesting athletic variation. However, the contralateral version of that is very, very valuable work as well. So here we are now, there we go with that contralateral, all right? So there you go. So there you go. Those two patterns, ipsilateral, contralateral, again, could be cued with lunges to different dimensions as well. For example, I could be going, basically straight away, and then to 1, and then to 2, and then to 10, and so on, like that. And again, different ground forces, different core forces when I'm only pressing unilaterally, right? Oh, one last thing before I go. So notice this. You've got one band, right, and you've got somebody in a static stance, and maybe they don't, you want to be training some anti-rotation type work, right? Well, we do a lot of this type of idea and the rotation. Let me tell you that pressing unilaterally from a square stance, particularly, right, that is going to give you very interesting anti-rotation work. Obviously, if you're here, that's a different story entirely. We can get a lot more press into it when we've got that back foot lunged back and we're driving forward. But here, changing your connection to the ground, if you recall the anchor point training overview, when you change your connection to the ground, you are changing the forces that are going to move through your body, forces through tissues, right? So here we are, boom, there, I'm getting some interesting anti-rotation work simply from that single press, right? So moving past the pressing, linear pressing, right? And again, if you're working from different anchors, obviously I'm a low anchor, I'm pressing up. If a high anchor, I can be pressing down. This is all going to light me up slightly differently. I would say as a general rule, it would be useful to vary your anchor points. If you're doing this practice consistently, it would be useful to vary your anchor points between workouts. To work even the same routine of exercises from a different anchor point, you're going to get different stimulation, right? It's going to add something. And in some cases, the different anchor point is needed if you're looking to create a specific adaptation response. So another way I like to work with elastic resistance, and it isn't really done a lot in the resistance game. There are a lot of folks in the club and even the kettlebell and the mace world that work circular overhead motions for shoulders, right? And this is all very old martial arts work. It's very, very good for the shoulders. Well, yeah, the shoulder is a circular joint, right? So here I'm doing is a straight stance. I'm just holding one side, right? And then I am working those circles backwards, forwards. Now, once you've got that working for you well, you can start to work reciprocal. You can work them bilaterally, right? You can be working them with alternate stepping, that idea, right? And you can obviously work them backwards as well. So this is all fresh, interesting, coordinative resistance training work on your feet that is, again, going to work ground forces consistently, which is athleticism, everything from athleticism to fall prevention, really. So circles, right? Backwards, forwards, again from a lunge stance, again with alternate, all those progressions that you can use around the ground, on the ground, you can use instead of simply linear pressing, you can add circular movements to those same ideas. One other pressing idea I want to show you that I've neglected to tell you at the very beginning. Look, notice this. If I'm going to do an alternate pressing, what I want to do is I want to come out here, hold one side, press that. So the hold side, I'm basically getting that isometric work, right? As I come back here now, I've got core stabilization to deal with. Press it out. That isometric work's going up. Core stabilization. There we go. There. See? So, interesting ways to work, again, those patterns, and you can work them quickly, you can work them slowly. I will say that all of this static work is really great for very, 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 very slow reps. So if you want to work in that metabolic rate, right, that is aimed at anaerobic exhaustion, gassing the muscles out, right? Those slow reps from those static stances are a very interesting way to gain that systemic benefit, right, of that elevated BDNF, for example, for that type of strength work. Okay, so your overview on some of the pressing ideas. By the way, I was using the light version of the 2.8 band there. For the rows, I'll use the 5-foot version so that I stay more in the picture, because if I'm rowing with the big band, I'm quite a ways out. That long band is awesome if you've got the space to work with it. When you don't have that much space to work with, these 5-footers certainly will do the trick. They've got a quicker change in resistance and obviously a shorter range of motion. But they certainly do the trick. And in fact, if you're really dedicated to this practice, probably a good idea to have both lengths, because they're different resistance curves in their own right, and can be used even differently for specific work. So, rowing, right? So here we are, square stance again, neutral grip, and there's our basic bilateral row. The cues are feet shoulder width, maybe a little wider. Athletic stance, right? We call that horse stance as well. So vertical hands, and there we go. Shoulders back, row it back. I find the best cue is drive those elbows back. Right? Try to get the elbows back. And so you've got the underhand variation, and then here, the overhand variation, squeezing those shoulder blades together and slowly return. Again, common thing with bands, as people not starting with resistance on the band, you always want to have some resistance on the band, bring it all the way back, and then you want to also not let the band pull you back. You want to resist it back. Even when you're moving quickly, you want to feel that band all the way back and feel it throughout the whole range of motion, right? So, static stances, here we go. There you go. So if I want to go alternate, notice before, I'm going to hold that, right? So that gives me that anti-rotation work here, and an isometric hold on my back. right? So here's a little choreography. So overhand, overhand, neutral, neutral, underhand, underhand, right? There's another nice, interesting way to work isometrically, right? Where you're holding and then you're moving. There, that's another volume 1. That's something interesting for you. So that's your square stance ideas. Obviously, then again, you've got your circles from the static stance. Notice the underhand, right? The overhand, and then swimming. Again, this program, the circular program, will be expanded in. You don't see any of it in volume 1, really. Maybe 1 or 2 ideas. There'll be several more in volume 2. Backwards, right? Again, changing the grip. All of this, you can see how all of those changing of orientations of my hands, right, and directions of the circle, all going to light up my shoulders, my back, particularly, slightly differently in useful ways. So, again, now we're going to get into the static lunge stance, right? Again, center of gravity, basically over my front foot here, a slight forward lean. That's an important cue, right? I sometimes see, in fact, I did this myself for several years, people rowing like this, tall back, right? That's a lot of force, a lot of shear at the knee with the femur moving at this angle. When you give that slight hinge, what you'll feel is your hamstring is now engaged. This is far more athletic. So just a slight, when you're training on your feet and rowing, a slight hinge forward. And there you can see, boy, I tell you right now, my left glute particularly is getting really, really nice work from that row, right? As the ball of my foot is driving into the ground to keep me from being pulled forward. But all of that tension through the glute and top of the hamstring, particularly in that movement. Very, very strong movement for that type of work. So, static stance, again, notice, take that same idea with a lunge, right? And I can be rowing from that position. In this position here, very interesting. Maybe get a little further over here. So here, right? So you can see here, every different way there's so many different ways to program upper and lower body, all these different patterns, lunge patterns, just from those static stances, doing that alternate unilateral work, changing my hand orientation. Those are all useful pulling exercises. When I do them choreographed like that, or when I do sets of each of them in a workout, I maintain you're getting a higher neural load that way than if you do the same thing, for 3 sets. So this is really what I'm encouraging people to do, is add more variety into the actual program that trains the various muscle groups, the various movements of backs and the chest and all that in an integrative fashion, but also in a fashion that requires the body to push and move load differently, either each set or even as you progress through one set with several movements that are all essentially in the same range of motion, but are all somewhat different, Okay, so next idea here, again, we'll just look at the various lunge patterns that we can work with. So this is the bilateral. Again, the bilateral, that's your highest work rate. Notice this, I can do that nice internal rotation, so overhand, finish with that. That's a particularly nice one, right? Again, slight forward lean. There. That same idea, obviously, I could be now going back to the side, to the angle, to the side, that sort of thing. Same idea, I could be doing all those lunge patterns and keeping the circles going, for example. A very interesting way to work constant tension, right? It looks a little bit like this. Right? Change direction, change hand orientation. All very interesting, steady work. can gas you out pretty quickly. It's pretty nice. Okay, ipsilateral pattern. So the ipsilateral row can be done a couple of different ways. It can be done straight on, right, this way, a little more challenging for balance, or it can be opened up across body, right? So, right, those are your ipsilateral options, right? And then contralateral looks like that. Again, a little forward hinge, and away you go. And again, those same ideas can be done again around the clock, all the different points of the clock. Besides the reciprocal rows, right, we can also work them bilaterally. So here we'll start from a static stance. Basically, that's a shrug, right? Upper back. Okay. That's all about the lats there. Here's a nice idea. It's hitting me right between the shoulder blades. And again, this is all quite specific in the muscular demands, each of those movement patterns, but it's also systemic in the sense that our entire body is having to work, right? And then as we're deliberately, intentionally working at different metabolic rates, we're now intentionally working organismically, right? So those are the three levels: specific, systemic, and organismic. More about that tomorrow too. Okay, so there's your rowing ideas. Again, progressed with the circles and the lunges and the different patterns. The main cues that are really key: starting with resistance, resisting the return, not letting the bands pull you back, right, but actually feeling the return, even when you're working at pace, right? And the slight hinge on the lunge, right? This is really key for getting the right work happening through the posterior chain rather than this idea here. Yeah, okay, I wanted to, before I get into the core ideas, I wanted to demo the pushing ideas. These are, obviously they're like pressing. It's chest, mostly chest work on the upper body. But notice this, right? So pressing straight ahead, right? Pushing, coming back under control, really key, right? So then I'm out here, and I can move side to side, right? And then come back. That exercise is as fundamental, to my mind, it's as fundamental as a carry, right? It is the resistance band version of a carry, if you will, in the sense that you are having to locomote with resistance. It's like a sled push a bit, except that with this tool, right, I can actually do some pretty interesting work. So at a certain point, you come to choreography where you're going to go out, 2 o'clock, okay, back, okay, 11 o'clock, out, okay, back, 1 o'clock, you know, or maybe you're coming out, and you touch, and then back, and then out, touch. So you can see, for example, those reaction drills with the lights, with the pushing, and then you're coming out and you have to touch a light with your foot to put it out. Quite useful work, right? Those ground forces are awesome. Another pushing variation I really like, unilateral pushing. Again, creates this demand for core stability and getting that out there and then bringing it back. Another variation of that can be this: turn and then press back out again, and then back. And when we have resistance on the band, turn, press back out, and away you go. So those long bands, right, that's ideal practice for those long bands. It really is where they really shine, right? Okay, so the next section of ideas that we progress is the is core work, right? Rotation, if you will. So here I've got these anchored high-low. Obviously, you could do this with any of these bands. Actually, I think I'll use the light right here. So the Pallof Press. I remember when I first came into this industry, 2010, I met a guy by the name of John Schaemberg who trained with Michael Boyle, which is where Pallof developed this exercise. And he's a mixed martial arts coach. He did the physical training for George St. Pierre when George was at his peak. So he was flying pretty high. And I can remember going into his gym to demo ideas. And this was 10 years ago. I was still very early in my practice. And boy, he was the first guy to show me this exercise. And he was all about the Pallof Press. Oh, amazing core stability. And it's fascinating how we progress exercise ideas as they get out there. But that's just getting started, right? There are, from this point of view, from this orientation, right, side on to the anchor, right, with this notion of creating this anti-rotation, there are so many ideas that we can create with the stir the pot, right, in all these different dimensions, right, around the world. This one here. So these are all very useful. If we want to add some lower body work to this particular idea, it's pretty interesting to work the elevator, right? And then back up, and then, we can change direction. Now you can imagine how different that work is from the pulling away, starting on this arm, versus the pulling close, right? All the work is in the bringing the band over, and then in this one, all the work is in the letting the band go back to the anchor. As you can see, distance is resistance. So when you add the squats to that, you're adding a lot of different neural work. It's just more work, more ways for the brain that has to organize the muscles to respond to the resistance that you are mindfully creating. So stir the pots, right? With the elevator, pretty interesting work. Another great approach to this is the idea of doing the press, but with a lunge. So, and then back, back. You can see the progression there are quite different. I'm keeping this now. I have very little anti-rotation working. I pull away with that lunge. There's my anti-rotation work. Bring it back up. Or I can start that movement from here. That's more interesting, more work. So how far my hands are from my body matters. If you've got somebody who you're just starting out and you want them to do that, have them hold their hands just in front here and then do that. This is now a bit of a stability element for them, actually, right? Hands a little further out. Now the core's starting to fire. Hands a little further out. Now it's really starting to fire. So you can see how simply changing the distance of your hands to your body, you can scale the resistance for your client if they're having trouble, right? Tell them to bring their hands closer in and try it again. If you see they're cheating, tell them to move their hands further away. Or cheating, if they're doing it really easily, try moving your hands a little further away from your body, and immediately they'll get more adaptation demand. Now, other notions. So, I love this as a variation. Again, this is similar to the push, right? I call this a drag, a side drag. So again, I'm close to the anchor here, dragging away and then back. All the ground forces, the coordination there is very useful work. If I want to make this a bit more of a fly exercise, so I'm not helping with this rowing hand, right? I can orient, just pull that, and then keep that static, and then move that across and move away from the anchor. As I'm moving, I'm increasing resistance. This is an isometric load here, right? I can get quite a solid isometric load here. In fact, I can overload this into an eccentric. Like for example, I come out here. All right, so I can't really load that in any further, but if I load it here, I can drag it all the way over here. I'll hold still in the picture, and then even give that eccentric back. Again, it's a whole other practice where you're using your body weight to add load to the band to create eccentric work. But again, very useful if you want to create that anaerobic exhaustion for pure strength work, and for a specific reason, and also for the specific reason of hitting that metabolic demand. The drags, the eccentric work, eccentric isometric, long time under tension, is a really efficient way to get at that. All right. Okay. So other notions with core, right? Besides the anti-rotation, and then some of these ideas with the stir the pots and that, is a straight rotation idea, right? Notice that the real key cue on this is eyes on hands, right? So the whole cylinder moves together as opposed to this, right? That's all arms and shoulders. What I want is basically to hold this all here and then keep that. So I've got that stability, but now I'm initiating some rotation, if you want to, you should be definitely driving that back knee in, right? But you can start with keeping that feet planted, right? And that right hip, that back hip is going to definitely come in. But then if you want to accentuate that, then you can get up on the ball of the foot and give that a bit of rotation, right? So those are pretty useful ways to work core. You can take that idea and then you can add some choreography to it. Oh, something I want to show you here. Notice this. This happens to be our double wide handle. And there are some specific things you can do with this if you have them, right? That are hand tensioning, again, to create more isometric work, to create more overload, anaerobic overload. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this stir the pot, but I'm going to grip the handles tight, and I'm going to drive my hands together, right? So right now I'm driving my hands together, getting really my upper chest right here is getting quite lit. And now, you've got to be super mindful to be able to do that while you're doing the other movement. Anything that you've got to concentrate on, it's good neural load, right? You're having to concentrate, you know right away that is very, very helpful. Even if you can't do it well, it doesn't matter. You're having to concentrate. That's good work. It's useful work, right? You will eventually get that pattern. Nobody gets the patterns right away. It's like learning how to play a musical instrument, right? You need time on. There's a general idea is with adaptation that variety is going to leverage the amount of work you do, right? The more variety of demands you create, the fresher the work is, the more efficient the work is. But there is a skill element to strength that requires repetition, right? So it's to find that balance, right, where you're getting enough repetition to improve your form and improve to the point where you can handle a movement. When you're at the point where you can really handle a movement and you're trying to progress somebody, unless they're absolutely athletic, you know, and now you're working metabolic rates and trying to work their timing and really clean up fine points of their work, the moment somebody can handle a nice, smooth, static press in a lot of different dimensions, unilaterally, bilaterally, from a lunge stance, all that, immediately, right, if they're capable, they should be starting to move to presses with lunges in different dimensions, right? And then once they've mastered that, into circles and things like that. And then once they've mastered that, into choreography and reaction and things like that. That is the notion of progressing, where you're progressing physical challenge and neural challenge with the work. And I maintain that the more competent people become in their movement, right, the more capability they have, then the more efficient their workouts can become, because they can add complexity and even get more out of the time that they're investing, right? But in the beginning, they've got to invest in training on their feet and learning basic vocabulary so that they can basically expand that vocabulary. And whether it's with bands or a suspension strap or a free weight or kettlebell, as long as the principles are adhered to, then the progressions will all be evident and will definitely benefit somebody more than if they were just doing endless reps of the same exercise for months on months on months. Yeah, of course they're going to get stronger, no doubt about that. Everything works, it's all good until it's bad. But optimal looks a lot more like learning how to do this and then progressing that knowledge to something else that, again, makes you learn, again, new movements. The next set of ideas I've got for you involve connecting with the resistance with the band on your body. So for starters, I'll show you a few ideas with the waist anchor, with the waist high anchor. So this is a waist strap. You can obviously do this with any long band. This happens to be quite comfortable. If you've got loop bands, I like working inside the band so that you can move around. I find with belts, you're often very limited in terms of your ability to change your orientation of the anchor. And as you get deeper into practice, particularly, that is a really nice thing to have, right? So, just showing you some basic notions here. This is all about training ground forces, right? So again, either athleticism or fall prevention, the entire spectrum. So side steps, back under control, right? Side steps, back under control. There's another notion with side steps away, a little jump. That gives me a hard landing. The band is pulling me back, right? So same work going away, but different work as I've got to manage that hard landing. Right? So simple, we can work with also just simple lunges. Right? So what I'm getting here is drive off this foot, right? Drive off the instep, drive away, right? Getting a landing here, and then I'm getting control coming back. If I want to add something, some upper body work, either I'm doing this for maybe for a high intensity interval training, or maybe I just want to add some work and make the workout more efficient, then obviously a weight, a hand weight of something you could be pressing away or pressing up with your movements, or holding while you're creating that movement. So you've got an isometric hold going on the upper body while you're moving away from the anchor. When I change my orientation to the anchor, right, so here I've got, basically, the way I like to get that low up on the toes, walking back and forth, and then changing side steps. So again, different ground forces when I'm working here with a constant tension, particularly through my quads, right? And again, firing my feet, right? So there you go. So again, I'm working here now, ground forces from the side as I move back and forth. Facing away from the anchor, the obvious one is running drills. This is like pushing the car idea, but now I don't have really anything going on with my upper body. If I add a free weight or something to my upper body, that's great. I can do that. Just getting out here and doing lunges, right? Also quite useful for legs again, where it's all about the ground forces and working coordination and proprioception on our feet, and basically getting that chain to work. You can see here again, same idea with that I showed you with the pushing the car idea, right? Except now it's my waist. Again, dots, either a choreography around the clock, or reacting to colored dots, or reacting to called out numbers. If you don't have the colored dots, but you're training somebody, then all of that works quite nicely. If I was using this resistance with, again, an advanced workout idea, this resistance with, let's see here. I use my Bosu ball. So maybe an idea like this, or about, and then up, or out with. Again, notice it's all, this is upper body stopping momentum, right? But it's also ground forces, right? As I'm coming off that foot, different ways. So it's a number of ways that you can work that, right? Other notions. So harness is a really interesting way to work. It is more challenging for fall prevention. So better, a more. So when you have the harness on and you're facing away from the anchor, and now you're fairly limited in terms of your orientation of the anchor because of this type of connection. But this type of connection requires core as well as legs to work to move away from the anchor, right? So now you've got core working. The other thing is higher center of gravity. It is definitely more work to handle that coming backwards. Some of the most dangerous falls are people falling backwards. So if you're training active aging, training people to be able to take that quick step backwards and recover, right, is really a particularly helpful thing. So out, right, and then back, right. Notice this, if I go out really low and then stand up, that distance is resistancing. As that lever arm from the squat here gets taller, more resistance at the ground, right? So you want to be mindful when you're working with people with a harness that if they're going to go out low, make sure if they stand up, you're going to get pulled back very, very quickly if they're not aware of it. Once they've felt that force and understand that, that won't happen, but it's key. So make sure that they're aware of that level and be aware of it yourself, because people can get pulled back pretty quickly. There you go. Another notion with the harness is this idea for scapular traction. It's a nice back exercise, right? So here's the square stance idea, and we just squeeze the shoulder blades back. We go down, and we bring it back up. As we go down, we again reduce that lever arm. I can squeeze again, and then lever arm up. Core's gonna fire right here as that lever arm gets longer, and the resistance increases through the core. Right, so there's one notion there. Another, right, is square stances, just circles backwards, circles forward. Right, these bands are really comfortable on your shoulders. Right, you can get them onto your upper arms as well. So some interesting work there. Upper back. Again, though, core is firing, ground forces are happening. Right, I can be moving around here. This is nice quad work. Squeeze, 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 and move around. Back, forth, back. Load that up. So there you go. That's a couple ideas with the bands on for harness and bands around your waist. Okay, one last idea for you here with the bands around your waist. If you have two bands, right? Well, then you can use the bands around your waist and the band in your hand, for example, for drags, right? For rotation. Right? You got a little more work. Now you notice this is quite athletic, a lot of fun. Away, rip, oh, back, right? Drive, rip, oh, back, drive, rip, oh. So you can elevate the work very quickly. I've got two bands pulling me back. Certain amount of coordination happening there. As you can see, all the principles being applied, right? To a progression that takes you up to that next level of coordinative physical exercise. Okay, not too much time left, it would seem. So the next couple of ideas here, I'm just going to give you some arm ideas. Again, you can see the static, this, the square stance, curls, right? Cue here is keep that upper arm close to the body. If I have the low anchor, right, that curl is going to be much more down here. I'm going to have to adjust my distance to the anchor so I can handle it. So there's your bilateral, right? Your alternate lunge, right? That idea. And then you can get into your alternate, right? And you can add your lunges to different dimensions, either ipsilateral or contralateral. Again, different patterns. Once you've mastered all the footwork, right? Then all of the upper body moves pretty much can be applied to the different types of footwork that you're doing, right? I could be doing these with squats. Oh, I could be doing them from an isometric squat, a chair squat. Oh, I could be rotating. There's a nice variation there. You're getting a little rotation. So, triceps. Same idea, upper arm, that's a really good cue, upper arm tight to the body, right? So triceps basically, even from that midpoint anchor. Oh, bilaterally, I can drive them unilaterally. I can add there's a contralateral triceps with there's an ipsilateral, right? So again, all those same patterns. Again, taking lunges to different dimensions around the clock again. Can be cued, can be simply, one set done straight back, the next set done to the side. Totally useful additional neural load that is getting the work done in that range of motion. So rather than doing 3 sets of a tricep from a square stance, you can do it from different stances, right? So, let's see here. You can see how this is going to be different load than that, right? Still a triceps exercise, but by changing my footwork, by changing my orientation of the anchor, I'm changing how the forces are working. Every time you change how the forces work, you're creating a new neural load, fresh neural work, and this is also quite useful organismically to the entire process. That's why movement patterns are so fundamental. Last idea I'll demo here with the band is the idea of the eccentric. So again, notice this here, I curl, right? I drag it away, and then I release. So I'm not able to get that curl beyond there. I bring it in here and get that curl locked in here to my strongest part of my range of motion. Now I can drag it away, and then I can give it back nice and slow and create that high load. So if you're working, if you want to work anaerobically, some interesting ways to create load, right? Like I can do my row, I can back up, and I can just hold that, right? Hold, change direction, bring it back in, curl, back, hold, change orientation. Now you're into wrestling with the resistance, getting tremendous ground forces there, tremendous core, isometric core, so it's isometric upper body, so it's easier to manage, right? So a lot of these ideas, again, depending on your client and their capabilities, you know, you can start them and create work like that, right? Where upper body's isometric, but now the lower body's moving around, right? Again, it's fresh, different patterns, and you can basically work all your, you know, as you can see, all your presses, all your rows, a lot of that arm work as well is uses very similar vocabulary of movements, lower body movements, right? So once they're progressed, they can be progressed for all the exercises, and the learning curve becomes quite quick once people have got it. In the beginning, particularly resistance bands, people can be extremely herky-jerky with their movements. That's why I say start with resistance, let them feel the resistance, let them concentrate on the resistance moving back to the anchor and feel it through the whole range of motion. Then slowly add different orientations to the anchor, let them feel that through their core, feel the different ground forces, and then introduce movements and movement patterns, and away they go as they learn. You know, strong movement is learned. Movement is a skill. It's a central nervous system function. So really, if you want to help people move better and live longer and live more vitally, then it just requires a lot more than simply helping them being able to pick up things that are heavy or be stronger in their muscles, right? The answers are more complex. The answers are organismic. It's not complex if you think of it in the whole, right? If you think of it as a number of systems, right, that in fact all influence each other, whether it's your cardio system or your balance or your musculoskeletal system or your neuromuscular system or your cardio capacity, all of these things, they're actually working organismically. They actually influence each other as you train, right? And all of these things have their specific systemic neural effects, benefits as well. So as you'll see tomorrow, there's a lot of science that has happened over the last 15 years on various aspects of physical practice and neural health. And when you sort of look at them in the overall and connect the dots, it becomes apparent that best practice looks a lot more like what I've been talking about today than really anything I've seen to date presented by any of the people whose traditional approaches to fitness are all about basically increasing the strength of your muscles, right? So there you go. That's thank you so much for hanging out, and I hope I haven't gone over my hour in this presentation. I really appreciate you being here, and hope to see and hear from a bunch of you, and see you tomorrow. By the way, we've got some very good prices on our website right now, and if you use the code FAI at checkout, you will get another 15% off of what are very competitive prices. So appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Oh, and if you want a copy of the ebook, message me, right? If you've got the hard copy but you want to have an electronic version, please message me, and I'll shoot you the link for that as well. Cheers. See you tomorrow. Bye.